And I don't think I've ever experienced a press conference in which we've read text messages that are A, so fulsome, so robust, so apparently, allegedly self-incriminating, and yet on the other hand, so touching, right? With the suspect reaching out to his roommate, who is allegedly his boyfriend, who we understand identified as male at birth, now identifies as female, and the terminology he used. He was trying to protect him. He kept calling him my love. My reason for doing this is to protect you, but also asking him to delete the messages and not speak to law enforcement. So there's this heartbreaking duality that we're seeing.
So without a doubt, I think it's fair to say that the media has been extraordinarily awful post the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and it's only been 1 week since Tyler Robinson, the alleged gunman, fired the fatal shot that ultimately ended up killing him in front of a bunch of university students at a school event in Utah where Charlie Kirk was speaking. However, a lot of people are taking issue with this ABC News Live segment where you have the reporter in this particular case talking about all the intimate and honestly beautiful and a wonderful look into the ideas and the mindset of this great relationship between Tyler Robinson and his trans boyfriend, whatever you want to call the individual that he was texting about this particular shooting after this particular shooting. And the crazy thing is, and I don't know if a lot of people are highlighting it, but everything that ABC News reporter said about how in the messages Tyler Robinson said, "I'm doing this for you, I'm doing this to protect you," is not actually in the messages. That is a made-up back-end justification by this local ABC News reporter, and unless I'm missing something based on what has been released so far, nobody has any idea where he came up with that. And the crazy thing is about that is that actually makes the motivation worse had that actually been in the messages, because what that would show us is that Tyler Robinson, who, by the way, these messages prove that this guy was motivated by a left-wing ideology, was not only basically indoctrinated by left-wing ideology, but it was such a great extent that he quite literally believed that Charlie Kirk was an existential threat to his trans boyfriend that he was living with at the time that he committed this particular shooting. Now, of course, this is disastrous for the left wing, but the way it's portrayed by this reporter is as if there is some kind of nobility, and I can't fathom the reason why anybody would think this is a good idea in order to portray the shooter who killed Charlie Kirk in cold blood for talking to people in this kind of, romantic hero kind of way. But then again, as we've seen time and time again, the left is completely crazy on this issue and many other issues, and a lot of them genuinely believe that Charlie Kirk was deserving of this particular action, and that is absolutely horrible. So this is what we're going to discuss today. We are 1 week removed from the assassination of Charlie Kirk at the time that I'm recording this video. We have this court hearing that destroyed the narrative that this guy was this right-wing attacker who didn't like Charlie enough because he wasn't right-wing enough. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
It's heartbreaking on so many levels, Kira. Obviously, Charlie Kirk was murdered brutally in front of a crowd of thousands of people who watched him being shot through the neck and then essentially bleed out in front of him. And I think one of the things that the attorney here made a very fine point about is that a lot of these charges, 7 charges, were aggravated because children were present. Children witnessed this. Children were put in harm's way. And that was something that obviously is aggravating here, and that's one of the reasons that the suspect, in addition to the alleged murder being political in nature, is facing the death penalty. They're going for the death penalty.
So the clip that's going viral actually starts off pretty fine. He's talking about how sad it was that Charlie Kirk was murdered at this UVU event, and then he describes how, according to Utah law, they essentially use the presence of children, of youths, in order to get aggravated enhancements, in order to make sure that Tyler Robinson never sees the light of day again. And of course, we all know that they are pursuing the death penalty in this particular case. That is good. You should pursue the maximum penalty, but with these aggravated charges, even if you have members of the jury that don't want to give the death penalty to Tyler Robinson, at least you will have a situation where hopefully this guy will bare minimum get life without the possibility of parole. Now, of course, you compare and contrast that to the recent developments in the Luigi Mangione case, who murdered Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, in cold blood, who recently got a victory in that they dropped the terrorism charges because the judge said, oh, well, he's not trying to incite fear and get change through that incitement of fear in American policy. And just because he has a political motivation that he's laid out quite clearly doesn't make it terrorism. In this particular case, you actually have the prosecution, at this stage anyway, going as hard as humanly possible in order to make sure we get justice for Charlie Kirk. Because make no mistake about it, the number one priority is holding Tyler Robinson accountable, not offering him a plea deal of any kind, making sure that he is shamed in the public for what he did, despite the fact that the left is trying to romanticize him. So in the beginning of this particular clip that is going viral, we're all to the good. We're all perfectly fine. Now, of course, I do want to say that there is a red flag where he says sadness all around, which leads us to believe that they might be doing the innocent Baba Angel Aladdin thing for the assassin of Charlie Kirk. We might even get at some point in time the arrest poverty kind of language related to this particular case, even though it appears that this guy grew up pretty much well off, middle class to upper middle class in the state of Utah, had every advantage possible for himself, and he still turned out like this due to the adoption of a left-wing ideology.
And on the other hand, there is this duality of a portrait of a very human person, a very human experience from this entire family. As you mentioned it, the mother who essentially discovered that it was her son who had done this, the kid who had got a 34 out of 36 on the ACTs, who had a 4.0, who got a full ride to college here, that kid was the one who allegedly perpetrated. She saw those pictures and said, identified him essentially.
So look, I want to make something 100% clear for everybody out there in the audience. I find this coverage to be ridiculous. I find this storytelling, I find this narrative about, again, the man who murdered Charlie Kirk to be absurd in every possible way. And even though the family of Tyler Robinson appears to have done the right thing from everything that we can see, they recognized him, they alerted each other, they convinced him to turn himself in. There were reports early on of the dad restraining him, not allowing him to take his own life, making sure that he faces accountability. I actually don't want to hear about the family of Tyler Robinson. I'm sure they're sad, I'm sure they're devastated, I'm sure there are impacts to them, but the fact is, all of those impacts are on Tyler Robinson. All of those consequences for that family are on their son who pulled the trigger, and even though they're not responsible for this, and they did the proper thing when your son or relative or anybody you know commits such a heinous crime, I don't like this overhumanization of that particular side of this particular case, because I find it to be patently absurd, and we all understand what they're doing in the media in this particular case. I don't give a damn about the guy's ACT score, which was, by the way, previously reported as a perfect ACT score. Apparently it's a 34 out of a 36. So I guess, the fact that he committed homicide is somehow mitigated by the fact that at some point in time he was good at the schoolwork for whatever reason, even though, again, he parlayed that into a scholarship and he only went for one semester before dropping out of university. So yeah, I don't give a damn at all about the sad state of Tyler Robinson's life or his family or anything of the sort. They did the right thing. You shouldn't harass them because they did the right thing. And also, family members are not responsible for the crimes of their family members. Sins of the father or sins of the son in this particular case. But I don't want to hear this nonsense about, oh my God, what a sad, sad tale.
And then those text messages. And I don't think I've ever experienced a press conference in which we've read text messages that are so fulsome, so robust, so apparently, allegedly self-incriminating, and yet on the other hand, so touching, right? With the suspect reaching out to his roommate, who is allegedly his boyfriend, who we understand identified as male at birth, now identifies as female, And the terminology he used, he was trying to protect him. He kept calling him my love. My reason for doing this is to protect you, but also asking him to delete the messages and not speak to law enforcement. So there's this heartbreaking duality that we're seeing very tragically playing out.
So the idea that these messages were touching or moving or gripping emotionally, to me, is rather odd to describe them that way, especially since a lot of people have been saying that these text messages are objectively weird. They sound so matter of fact that some are speculating that they're actually fake, and you have different people trying to attribute who faked these messages to different parties, even though, again, they've been submitted to a court of law as evidence, so they actually have to meet some kind of standard. So you have the Matt Walsh camp, which is, of course, Matt Walsh being under the belief that Tyler Robinson was trying to give some kind of removal of culpability and foreknowledge from his boyfriend. And then you have the people that think that these are staged by the FBI in order to frame this individual, in order to frame the left wing, in order to stop the real assassins from being held accountable, which, let's be honest, for a lot of people, they end up blaming Israel or Ben Shapiro in conjunction with Israel. And by the way, maybe we have to make a video on how absurd that is, but needless to say, Ben Shapiro saying at one point in time that we as a collective are going to pick up the bloody mic of Charlie Kirk and make sure that he's not forgotten should in no way, shape, or form be interpreted to the idea that Ben had him killed in order to steal Turning Point USA. Again, there's no evidence for this. It's actually really reprehensible. I've talked about it before in order to try to pin this on him, considering he's known Charlie Kirk for like 13 years. But yeah, the messages are in no way, shape, or form being interpreted broadly as this emotionally gripping thing. In fact, people are pointing out how weird and some people are attributing it to a kind of autism or something of the sort. And if anything, they read rather emotionless, despite the fact that Tyler Robinson appears to have called his trans boyfriend my love a couple of times in the messages. And in fact, I think I should read them to you so you can understand what they actually say versus what this ABC reporter is characterizing them as. So it starts by saying that after reading the note, the roommate responded, "What?" with a bunch of question marks. "You're joking, right?" with a bunch of question marks. Then Robinson ends up texting the roommate saying, "I'm still okay, my love, but I'm stuck in Orem for a little while longer yet. Shouldn't be long until I come home, but I gotta grab my rifle still. To be honest, I had hoped to keep this a secret till I died of old age. I'm sorry to involve you." The roommate responds, "You weren't the one who did it, right?" Robinson responds, "I am. I'm sorry." The roommate, "I thought they caught the person." Robinson, "No, they grabbed some crazy old dude, then interrogated someone in similar clothing. I had planned to grab my rifle from the drop point shortly after, but most of that side of town is locked down. It's quiet, almost enough to get out, but there's a vehicle lingering." The roommate asks why. Robinson responds, "Why did I do it? Question mark. The roommate says yes. Robinson responds, "I had enough of his hatred. Some hatred can't be negotiated out. If I'm able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence. Going to attempt to retrieve it again. Hopefully they have moved on. I haven't seen anything about them finding it." The roommate says, "How long have you been planning this?" Robinson says, "A bit over a week, I believe. I can get close to it, but there's a squad car parked right by it. I think they already swept the spot, but I don't want to chance it." Now look, I'll link the rest of the messages, but these are very matter-of-the-fact kind of text messages. There is nothing in here where Robinson's like, "I did it to protect you, baby. I love you always," or anything that the ABC News reporter appears to have imagined, hallucinated, in order to have a fantasy about this particular situation or these messages. And by the way, don't think I don't notice how wordy these messages are from Robinson, but based on the fact that this guy appears to have been intelligent, however very weird and very socially awkward according to multiple accounts, I'm not surprised by that. And also, I do want to point out that it's wordy specifically from Tyler Robinson's side. The idea that the people who are staging these messages are writing his messages super weird, however the trans boyfriend that is cooperating with law enforcement is pretty much texting as normal, to me kind of undercuts the idea that this is just a created, manufactured conversation, not to mention the fact that they have to be submitted to the court as evidence, which means they have to meet some kind of standard for legitimacy. And again, we don't really see, as of right right now the attorney for Tyler Robinson challenging the validity of these text messages. But again, it's just a weird thing among many other weird things in the news media coverage that you know for a fact would not be the case had it been anyone other than a right-wing person who was assassinated, again, on video before our very eyes. And by the way, I also want to add to everybody out there in the audience that you really should, and I don't normally tell you to unfollow people, but I really want you to consider unfollowing anybody who's doing this whole thing where they basically come up with an excuse to re-show you the video or demand the 4K footage of the shooting from Turning Point USA in order for them to judge whether or not the bullet bounced off a vest or something on Charlie Kirk, because all of that is them just trying to give you a reason to look at the gore, give you a reason to look at the horror that was inflicted upon Charlie Kirk. And make no mistake about it, as this goes to trial, all of that evidence will be submitted in the proper venue, but I just find it rather repugnant, even more so than the conspiracy theorists that are trying to, grind their agenda with Israel or Ben Shapiro or whoever. I find those people also to be repugnant and exploiting the situation, but the fact is, at least they're not all trying to direct you at the bullet hitting Charlie Kirk's neck, again, to make you watch this horrific video, or harassing Turning Point to release the 4K footage so they could do all these additional breakdowns. Again, if you have something substantive that will actually change the facts of the case, that will actually impact the motivation of the shooter or something of the sort, that's fine to talk about. Even if I find it to be a ridiculous conspiracy that is exploitative, where you're aiming ire at your previous enemies and whatnot, I understand that that actually has some impact if it were to be true. But this stuff is just so gross and so disgusting. Again, guys, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I didn't realize that he was a personal friend of Charlie Kirk, and we were talking about AmFest, America Fest in Arizona this year, and how it looks like a ton of people are going to it. And I asked him if he was going to get his special pass that he usually gets, and he told me that his connection was Charlie for that. And somebody in the chat was like, well, what happened? Did that guy get fired? Not realizing we were referring to Charlie Kirk. And then you have like a moment where you realize that there are so many people that especially again on this side of the camera, that are connected to this guy personally, that feel this loss in a much deeper way than somebody like I would feel it, or any other commentator that didn't know him personally would feel it. And it's just heartbreaking to know that these people are confronted time and time again with all these thinly veiled excuses in order to show you basically the gore porn of Charlie Kirk's murder. So again, I'm not going to tell you to block these people, but you know what? I'm going to start doing that myself, because it's so gratuitous, it's so nasty. People need to actually say something about it. And again, of course, the media being as horrible as ever, also expected. But again, it's not just the mainstream media, it is the social media engagement baiters that are being rewarded for it, again, on platforms like X. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute madness going on over at ABC. Till next time.